First, thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Here. So you have this incredibly diverse background, but one of the things that I think a lot of people think about or ask you about that we want to kind of cover off right at the outset is how have you approached these two disciplines? I mean, how did you kind of get into this space where you had these extraordinary tracks in your career?
Yeah, it's interesting. I talk about it a lot, how I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to take the two things that I loved as a kid as hobbies and to be able to pursue them both professionally. Essentially, it's kind of two different careers because they happen kind of linearly back to back. I grew up loving movies and I loved video games. And I got to work in the video game industry for many years as editor-in-chief of PC Gamer and other magazines. And after that, I had a second, which is now longer than the first career, which seems strange to me, as a screenwriter in Hollywood for film and television. And I think of them as different in just because they're separated linearly. I did one and then the other, and they didn't really cross over very much, if at all. But when you and Dean were up here talking about how it's all kind of one melange of science fiction, it made me realize that it has actually always been connected for me. When I was a kid in my formative years, when I would play video games and read comic books and read science fiction and fantasy novels and watch movies, Star Wars, Star Trek, all of that great stuff, it never occurred to me that these were different things that belonged in different boxes. It was all I just wanted to escape. Like, I was kind of a geeky kid who got pushed around at school and, typical nerd, and I just want, you want to escape into worlds that are just better than this one, or more interesting, or just different in some kind of exotic and kind of imaginative way. And whether that came in the form of a comic book or a video game or a TV show or a movie or a novel, whatever it was, I felt like I was scratching that itch. And I always found actually that the video games scratched it more effectively than most because they invite you in. If you read a comic or watch a TV show or Star Wars, whatever it may be, you feel like you want to be part of that world in a really great, we talk about immersion a lot. When the lights go down in a theater, you really do kind of feel like your imagination kind of crosses, that you cross over into that plane, at least in your mind. With a video game, I think that happens in a much more real way, because you're hands-on and, the game is talking to you and, it's addressing you in first person as opposed to some other character. You're having the adventure, not some other guy. And so I always felt that that just felt kind of more of an effective way for me to escape than almost any other medium in which science fiction ideas can be expressed, particularly in storytelling. Like I grew up on Infocom and back when Activision still did things like this. There were some really, really interesting games from Activision. There was an old thing called Portal, not the Valve one, but years ago there was this old interactive adventure, like an interactive novel called Portal that I absolutely loved. And Alter Ego and all these kind of where you would live like someone else's life through this kind of interactive form. I wish we did more experimentation like that. We see it now on the indie scene, but we're not seeing it at a AAA level at all. Like really kind of bold expressionistic ideas of kind of big science fiction ideas. But certainly, I've been very, very, very fortunate in my career in that as I translated over from video games into film, that was happening at just the same time that video games were getting more cinematic ambitions. And so I was able to translate some of my knowledge of the video game world into helping video game developers tell more cinematic stories.
Well, since you've had that front row seat to both science fiction in games and science fiction in film, it's worthwhile testing with you whether our thesis for this event is sensible. Would you agree that there is a crossover where there is influence between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I would go even further than that and don't even think of them as the two. Like, I really do think it is just, you have writers and creators and people that think about this stuff have ideas for stuff all the time. I'll give you an example. Whenever I think of an idea for a story I want to do, one of the first questions I'll ask myself is, well, what is it? What's the best way for this idea to be expressed? And sometimes if it's something that might be dependent on a lot of action or has very visual ideas, it's probably a TV show or a movie of some kind. If it's something that's a little bit more inside the head of the character, I had something like that where I wrote it as a novel because I just felt like it was easier to kind of express the ideas that I wanted to do as a novel. It'd be more of a stretch as a film. And there's an idea that I've wanted to do for a long time that I've struggled to find a medium for it, and it occurred to me recently it's actually perfect for VR. And so I'll go, I think stories will just find whatever is the best nest for them to kind of nurture and grow, and what will allow them because like the idea I want to do is like one character in an enclosed space, and there's a way to do that as a short. It's certainly not a big action movie or anything, but there's a way to do it as a short film or maybe a short story. But it occurred to me that a lot of the way, because most of our VR experiences right now are still short, because it's hard to convince people to keep the headset on for more than 15, 20 minutes. I increasingly find that like the shorter ideas that I have are actually, VR has now become a really inviting place for those ideas to try and express themselves.
So building on that, do you find that games as a medium, having the options of VR, mobile games, more in-depth PC games, do you think games have a natural advantage over film perhaps in telling science fiction stories or putting you into a science fiction environment?
Yeah, absolutely yes. Because again, of the agency that we talked about, but so you think about science as the foundation of science fiction. It's about observation, it's about experimentation, it's about trying things, it's about puzzle solving, and those are all things that we do in video games. And if you're invited to kind of get in and try to break things and experiment and figure out what the parameters of your world are, whether it's in a 2D flat plane or immersive kind of VR orb that you're inside. You want to, scientists and people that think about the future, they want to reach out and touch things and see if they can break them or make them more interesting. And so just being able to be tactile, and physically now we can really be tactile with hand controllers. It just feels to me like a more effective way to explore science and science fiction. And I will say this as well. This is something that we deal with every day in Hollywood, and this is actually the biggest inherent advantage that I think video games have over all the other kind of forms of like screen-based entertainment. I hear this from people in television all the time. They hate the fact that it's incredibly difficult to get people to just look at one screen and focus on it. Because we live now, there's probably 15 people at least right now, well, as they listen to me, they're also looking at their phones, and it's just unavoidable. That's just the reality that we live in now. It's almost impossible to curate an experience that is so interesting that you don't want to look at anything else. You forget that you have your phone. And TV showrunners hate this now because they have to, they realize they can't win that war, and so they just try to lean into it. And so now they live tweet during their shows, but they hate the fact that they have to do it. Because I don't know if all showrunners feel this way, but some of the ones I've spoken to do. You go to all this effort to create this world and curate it and polish all the details, and every part of it is as good as you can make it, and then you put it on the air, and then you're encouraging people to look at their phones while they're watching it because they wanted to engage with the show. You're not engaging with the show when you look at your phone. You're disengaging from it and doing something else. It's like it's the kind of the TV equivalent of people that talk during a movie. Like, the murder should be legal for these people. Like, it's the absolute worst. And the polite way to do it is you sit and you watch the show, or you eat the loving meal, the meal that's been lovingly created, and then you talk about it afterwards, as opposed to kind of talking during it is a big problem. This is all just a very long-winded way of saying games have this really great advantage in that when I play a video game, I still play all the games. When I play a video game, it's the only time that I'm engaged with a screen that I put the phone away and forget it exists, because the video games demand your absolute full and complete attention in a way that nothing else can or ever will, because you're at, I was playing Forza Horizon the other day. Like, I can't even scratch my nose for a second. Like, I was playing Mario Kart. And I was playing Mario Kart with my wife last night. She's like, I want to scratch my nose, but I know I can't. But so that level of complete, like, that, you're just a prisoner of that game in the most delightful way. In a way that if you want to scratch your nose during a TV show or a movie, again, you can pause it, or you can just go off and just maybe miss a couple of minutes of it, but who cares? Video games, I think, have always had that advantage, and it's only becoming more apparent now as second and third screens come along, and you realize just how disparate and easily distracted our attention is. Video games have been completely immune to that, almost entirely, especially in online type games where, you can't pause them. They are happening in real time. If you can't just step away or suspend it. And so I think, it's actually one of the mediums, and I think people in film and television like me are increasingly finding that attractive, the idea of, well, I'm going to go to all this effort to make a story. I think I might like to put it in a medium where I know you're not going to disengage from it or be looking at your phone. And video games, I think, are the only medium left that can still guarantee that to some extent.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we were talking just a moment ago backstage about how when the original trilogy was done, the only way to experience Star Wars was through interactivity, was through games.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot through my time working. I had a lot of questions after I worked on Star Wars about, what was your experience of Star Wars as a fan? And obviously the movies, and not just because I worked in video games, but I think for a lot of people, there was this, I'm sure we all remember, there was a long period after Jedi and before the prequels came along, when George just wasn't interested in making the films, that I wouldn't say Star Wars was in a wilderness, but there were the primary thing that you think of when you think of Star Wars, the films just weren't being made, and there was no TV either. And so we had novels and comic books, and those were all really great. But there was a really, really long period where for the longest time, I honestly think that video games were pretty much at the vanguard of what Star Wars was for over a decade, during the time that I was on PC Gamer, kind of mid, through the 90s, TIE Fighter and Knights of the Old Republic, or even going back to the earlier Lucasfilm games. For a really, really long time, the only way you could experience Star Wars with the John Williams music and characters talking to you and TIE fighters exploding and things that actually felt like moving on a screen and felt close to a movie. Video games carried that burden and basically kept Star Wars alive in our imaginations for a really, really long time. And I think that we don't give the games enough credit as part of the kind of the canon of that whole universe.
Right on. Now, we've been talking a lot about the outputs, but since you've been part of the creation of both games and films, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. I think a lot of Star Wars fans remember that pre-visualization was kind of a key part of being able to plot out a scene, putting action figures in different locations and putting a camera through. Are you finding that in the creative process of making a modern Star Wars film that there are things that you're borrowing from VR or a common asset pipeline or anything like that are real?
I mean, I think certainly, we're desperately trying to find, applications for VR right now and trying to prove that it's all worth it. And I think ultimately it will be. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. Games are a big, a huge application driver for that right now. Obviously, we're not there yet. We will be. But I think, just in terms of kind of things like virtual set construction, that was something on Rogue. It was amazing. We would go down to ILM's, what they call their X Lab, where they do all their VR, AR stuff. And they had built, we told them, well, we need a rebel base, and we need, a mountain, kind of an imperial facility, a big communications center. I think you saw at the end of the movie, that big tower. We would tell ILM, these are the sets that we're going to want. And before anybody built anything physically, they went away and built them all in VR and AR spaces. And so Gareth and I could literally walk around. We had like Wiimotes, we had Wii controllers, and you could literally walk around inside a rebel base or on top of that Imperial Communications Tower on Scarif. And Gareth would say, he would literally look down, and because it's tracking everything, you could look down. That's one of the things that I think VR does really well, is that sense of oh shit, we're really high up. And Gareth would look down and say, can we be 200 feet higher? And the guy would go, and you would feel yourself go like that, and it was amazing. You really felt like what it was like to be, on what would be the final set of the film. Obviously way higher than it actually would ever be, because the real thing was only built 20 feet up. But we were 500 feet up as far as our brains were concerned. And just being able to walk through a rebel base, and Gareth would say, can we make this hallway longer, because we're going to need to have a conversation. And it would just get built longer in real time. And he's like, make sure this wall can pop out, because I'm going to want to put a camera here. And they would make all these notes. And so when the time came to actually build the sets and populate them with actors and crew, Gareth, to some extent, felt like he'd already been there a little bit, because we'd walked around them in these virtual spaces.
Very cool. Now, certainly you get a lot of questions about world building and storytelling, but one of the things that came up just earlier today was Austin Grossman made the comment that even the biggest IPs use cheats. And I'm wondering, how you understood that? I mean, what do you think is the function of a cheat?
That was one of the things that really stood out to me, because I've been listening to the other sessions. When Austin Grossman was talking about that, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting thought about cheating. I think it's okay to cheat. Writers cheat all the time. Just get to the finish line. If you have to cheat, do it. I mean, I don't even know what rule you would be cheating anyway. Is there a rule book somewhere that says you're not allowed to do this? And it's interesting, because particularly as I think about VR, I bought into VR entirely. I bought all the headsets. I have a Rift and a Vive and all of that stuff. And the longer I have it, the more I'm just waiting for it to do the thing that I really hoped it would do. And again, we're getting closer every day. We're not there yet.
What is the thing you really hope it would do?
I don't want to take the headset off after 10 minutes. I forget that I'm wearing it, and I'm just in this other world. And obviously that's a function of hardware and creating, getting the wires out of the picture and making the thing lighter. And again, getting to that point that it's just that, and you're there. Where that's hardware, but it's also creative. Until we get there, creative can also, I think, help with that. It's yeah, it's kind of sweaty, but what I'm doing is so interesting, I don't want to take the thing off. And so the hardware and software are both kind of equally, have got their kind of burdens to carry in terms of getting us there. What's interesting about the cheating comment, because we were talking about, you can go to Tatooine, in one of the ILM VR demos and kind of hang around the Millennium Falcon and stuff. I actually think this is an area, and I say this as someone who, as a screenwriter, often says, like, we need more original IPs in Hollywood, and like we shouldn't just constantly be iterating, on Harry Potter and Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and Fast and the Furious, and eventually we're going to run out of these things, and we'll go, oh, we didn't build any new things to come behind it, so now we can't, mine those into the ground either. So we have to be making new things. But I would say with VR, the biggest challenge for me as a consumer of VR is convince me to put on the headset, because I don't always want to do it. I got to fire up my PC, and like there's wires, and it's over my shoulder, and the headset. Like it's actually really, really cumbersome. And Daydream and Gear VR are a little better at that, but like it's a bigger ask, I think, for a lot of people than it is just pick up a controller and start playing, where it's just ready to go. So how do you convince people to do that when they might be like, do I really want to do this? I think giving people a kind of a proposition that they're going to want to say yes to right away. Like, hey, how would you like to walk around inside Star Wars? Yeah, of course I would. How would you like to walk around inside Star Trek? Or how would you like to live, inside Middle Earth? Absolutely. Like, I already know what that is. I already know that's fantastic. I totally want to be there. And so now all you have to do is execute on it. But so half of the battle is already won. A lot of the stuff that I see on Oculus and a lot of the games that are out there, even though they might be really cool original IPs, you have to sell me on that as well.
Right.
You have to sell me on Wilson's Heart, or you have to sell me on whatever maybe the new thing that's come along that they're saying is very cool, but it's like, I don't know what that is. Like, it's kind of hard to get. It's why we don't make many original movies in Hollywood. It's like people look at the poster, I don't know what that is. But you see a Star Wars or a Star Trek, oh yeah, I know what that is. I want to go see that. And so this is an issue that we can solve in VR as well a little bit by just getting people to the point where, oh my God, I tried it. I'm so glad I tried that. But getting people to try it, I think, is a function of offering them something that they already know they would love to do.
But we saw that on the holodeck. I mean, what does Captain Picard want to do?
Well, this is what I think is so interesting. If you think about the holodeck in Star Trek, the holodeck is by far the most pie in the sky. Forget about any technological. I mean, the holodeck is absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. And frankly, as a technology, it should have been banned years ago because it goes wrong every week. It's like if a real technology failed that often and was that dangerous, there's no way it would be legal in the Federation. So they fail all the time. It's still, like just one line in one episode, somebody said, yeah, like it's still in beta, and we'd have been all good. But like this is a technology that's on every starship, but like people almost die in it every week. That's really, can you imagine that somebody died every week in Oculus? It'd be game over. But it's the only way you can make it interesting, because they created this, other writers often call the holodeck the plot device because they run out of ideas. Let's just go to the holodeck. But you can't get hurt in the holodeck. There's no consequence. This is one of the big issues. I'm going to go on a whole run now. But it's one of the issues with the holodeck is that they created an area to have stories where there's literally no consequence to any actions, which is like death for story. So the only way they could make story interesting is, well, it has to break every week. And, the safety features don't work. Yeah, right on schedule. The safety features are broken again. But to your point, this is what's interesting to me about the holodeck. They obviously sat around and said, look, we're already in a world where we can travel faster than the speed of light. We can have universal translators. We can beam people off planets. Our VR version is clearly not just going to be like this. Like let's just go all out and not even think about. Let's just say, yeah, energy can become matter. And that's it. Like, we don't have to explain it. But you live in this room, and you are literally, the holodeck is not. You are actually physically there in every way that's meaningful. But think about so that's the hardware, right? You can do anything in it. But look at what they actually did in those episodes. They recreated things that they already knew that they liked.
Right.
They went into the world of Robin Hood. Picard went into these old detective novels that he liked. Data went into the Sherlock Holmes novels. So even there, in the most fantastical iteration of virtual reality that's ever been seen on screen, we were basically, as Austin Grossman said, cheating, just doing the things we already know that we like to do. Because I think the audience understood, rather than Picard going into some like esoteric. I think Picard would probably do something like way more esoteric and boring to most of us. But they created something that most people would want. They essentially created things that most people would want to do. Yeah, I'd love to be a 1940s private eye, or I'd love to be, in the world of Sherlock Holmes or Robin Hood, or something that I already know. And so I just feel like as we're desperately trying to kind of like advance VR and get people to put on their headsets and pay for the hardware and buy into it, I think offering them something that at least saying like you want to be in this world, and here's the device that will get you into it, will help us immensely. And once we get everybody bought in, I think then we can start populating it with more original IPs. But stuff like Star Trek and Harry Potter and Star Wars, these are all really, really valuable things to us right now, and they're obviously only accessible to kind of bigger companies that can pay for those licenses. But in terms of convincing people to try VR, I think offering them things that they already wish they could do is one of the most important propositions that we can offer them.
Right on. Now, one of the things that you were talking about a moment ago was the idea that games are a one-screen experience, that you're focused on them, you can't turn your gaze away. And you mentioned that TV and film producers are paying more attention to this. Are you thinking that they're going to engage with the game industry more, or do you think that there's something new that is potential that allows interactivity to play a bigger role in linear content?
I think just generationally, in terms of getting, what we consider like old media, like film and television, and the new media of video games and VR, getting those together and to cooperate and collaborate in meaningful ways. I think just generationally, that's getting easier. I've been doing this long enough, and I'm old enough to remember when it was actually really difficult. When trying to make a movie out of a video game or vice versa was not an easy process because one side didn't understand the language that the other was speaking very well. And one of the value that I've had in some of those efforts is I'm somewhat bilingual. That I understand what the pros and cons and the needs and problems of a video game story are. I also understand just generically, I like to think, how stories work in film and kind of more traditional media as well. We struggled a lot when we first started to tell stories in video games. We would just hire screenwriters who had only ever worked in film, and they would come in and pitch ideas that might have been great for a film, but were useless for a video game. And we had all these kind of abortive attempts to try and marry the two in ways that just didn't complement each other very well. But just generationally now, you go and sit in the office of almost any executive in Hollywood, film or television, and they're probably younger than me now. They've got an Xbox or a PlayStation or both set up in their. Last meeting I walked into, they were playing a video game, and they had to pause it to sit and take the meeting with me. So you don't have to explain to people what these things are anymore. They already know. Our current generation of filmmakers like Chris Nolan and JJ and all these guys, they all play video games. They all know what they are. They don't have to be educated about this anymore. Or even educated is one thing, but convinced is another. Because video games, I think, are much less ghettoized than they used to be. They used to be considered, that's kind of what you do when you want to turn your brain off. We know that it's not that anymore. Some of the more interesting cerebral experiences and experimental storytelling is happening in video games right now. It's analogous to kind of the independent film scene, but it's actually even easier. I don't know how much they spent making something like, What Remains of Edith Finch, but I imagine it was probably cheaper than making an equivalent version of that as a live action, independent film. And so I think if you're looking for, I think as filmmakers, again, like myself, are just looking for, I don't care how the story gets told, I just want it told, and in the best, in the medium that I'm going to be able to, get the most juice out of it. What is that? I think you're going to find that filmmakers and auteurs and people that are interested in telling different kinds of stories and things that aren't just the typical kind of formulaic Hollywood fare or AAA video game fare are going to find themselves gravitating more towards kind of low-budget, independent video game development as ways to get their stories told.
What are some of those innovative games that you find are really compelling these days? What has really kind of jumped out for you?
Best game I played all of last year was Inside. By Playdead, and it was one of those rare experiences I had with a video game where it really just kind of shook me in every. I mean, you should all play it. It's a fantastic game. It's won a bunch of Game of the Year awards, and rightly so. And no dialogue. It won a bunch of awards for best story. There's no dialogue in it at all. And just as a writer, it made me think. It makes you think a lot about mood and sound design and all these different things you can learn from a game like that. But just as a writer, what I learned from it was, wow, you can do a really, really immersive. And completely captivating world and captivating characters, and there's not a word of dialogue in it, and you learn almost nothing about what's really going on, but it gives you just enough that you desperately want to know more, and it suggests just enough that you really feel yourself drawn into the world, that it made me think about, wow, mate, is it possible to do that? Could you do something like that in film, where it's completely, abstract and silent, but still work in the same way. Again, part of the reason why they did it as a video game is the interactivity is part of what makes it compelling. But it really made me think a lot about storytelling and how we always try to find ways to do things with as little as possible, like strip the story down to its absolute kind of bare elements. And something like Inside or Journey, which is another one of my favorite games of all time, where again they give you almost nothing. And I wish we could do that more in Hollywood. Because generally, you find that the higher you go up in budgets and the more mainstream something is, the more risk-averse people become. It's a lot of the notes you get in development, can we explain this more? We don't want the audience to be confused. It's there's a fine line between confused and compelled. Like, what does that mean? That's really interesting. You didn't tell me kind of what that was, but I desperately want to know what was behind that door that you gave me a glimpse of, or whatever. I wish we would do more of that, and it is why I'm so grateful that we have independent film and have independent game development, because, like I said, the big budget, the Activisions, the EAs of the world just aren't in that business anymore. They're in the business of iterating on proven franchises, FPS, RPGs, just big genres that they know they can, the spreadsheet tells them they will make money. And so I'm so grateful for the fact that we have an independent game scene where you can spend almost no money at all, but express an idea that is really beautiful or romantic or just creatively, artistically worthwhile. I don't know what we would do if video games, it was just nothing but stuff that was going on at the AAA level. I think we'd be creatively almost entirely bankrupt.
Given that so much of the film industry, you've mentioned that a lot of producers are more familiar with games, they're playing games, but it seems like the Hollywood system is still very much the way it's always been. Like you work through an agent, a production company pitches a studio. What would you recommend for our audience if they have a great IP that they want to partner with a film company on, see a film made out of their IP? What would you suggest is their kind of way forward?
I mean, honestly, these days, if you have a great IP, all you have to do is wait for the phone to ring. Someone will find your game. I mean, for example, like when Inside came out, I called my agent and said, "Can we find out if anyone's doing anything, if anyone's inquired about this?" And it was like, I was one of the first people to play it, and so it wasn't very well known. And I didn't even know if there was anything there, like if it was an idea that could even be expressed as a film or a television show or anything outside of a video game. I always just wanted to talk to the guys because I was so blown away by what they had done. And my agent called back the next day and said, yeah, they've been inundated with people from Hollywood that want to talk to them about this idea. So the cream in independent game, cream floats to the top really, really, really fast. Like just in the same way that the next kind of self-published blockbuster novel will get snapped up almost immediately. There's an entire phalanx of people in Hollywood whose job it is just find this stuff, like find the next big thing before anyone else does, and then and take it off the market and own it. And that's now increasingly happening in video games. And again, it's not necessarily their job to do that, but this is what increasingly kind of the younger generation of film and television executives in Hollywood just do. They go home and play Inside or Journey or whatever, and go, oh shit, this is cool. We should find out if someone has the rights to this, and they go get it. So it's very. I would just if you have a great IP and you want to exploit it in some way, I would say like your problems are mostly over in terms of at least finding someone that would be interested in talking to you. The challenge is creating the great IP in the first place.
Awesome. Now, you've created your own original IP, and you've worked with some extremely well-known IP. How would you compare those experiences, and where would you prefer to take your career? What's the next direction for you?
I think most writers will tell you that they always prefer kind of working out of whole cloth, and by that I just mean creating something that is wholly yours. I mean, Star Wars is always going to be will probably be on my tombstone more than anything else. I think about what will be on my tombstone a lot for some reason. Yeah, I mean, that obviously was an opportunity to work in something that was precious to me ever since I was a child. But for the most part, it's working in Hollywood. A lot of writers will tell you it's actually a bit depressing because it's such a secondary medium. Very little gets created in Hollywood anymore. Again, there's an independent film scene, but in terms of like big, ballsy things, people forget the original Star Wars in 1975 was just a crazy spec script that somebody had written. It's like, wait, this guy's like a big carpet, and this guy's over here, he's a robot, but he also does magic. Like, how does that? Like, it's all crazy. It seems nuts. Somebody had to take a risk on it, and now obviously, it's worth billions and billions of dollars. But somebody had to take a risk on that first thing before it was a known quantity. Somebody had to take a risk on the first Fast and Furious movie. Nobody knew that it was going to become this thing, and it wouldn't have if somebody hadn't said this could be cool. And so I think we're always encouraged. I think we just always find, as a writer, I feel like the things I create myself are my kind of natural born children, and the things that Star Wars and things like that'll always be George's child. I've just got to kind of help look after it for a little while, and that's obviously because it's so special to me. That's kind of an exception to the rule, but for the most part, I think writers would probably tell you they would love it if they could just be creating their own stuff and not just being asked to kind of the next time I get a call from my agent, it will be something like, "Do you like Hot Wheels?" And I'm like, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, they've got this script and it needs, Hot Wheels. They think Hot Wheels can be the next big thing." It's like, why? Why do they think Hot Wheels can be the next thing? Oh, because people buy a lot of toys. But like, it's not the impetus to create that film is not. I don't mean it could be anything, but anything of any of those, toys or whatever it may be, it's coming from it's a pie chart telling them, a spreadsheet is telling them that it could be a great thing, as opposed to just like whatever that thing that's inside of you that as a writer, as a creator, you go, I got to get this out. I got to show this to someone. If it doesn't start there, I feel like you're already starting kind of 20 yards back from where you need to be.
Can you share what's the next Gary Whitta story we're going to see?
I'm working on a couple of original TV things right now. I just did a movie for Fox called Mouse Guard, which is about a legion of kind of Knights of the Round Table, but they're mice and they protect the creatures of the forest. It's based on a series of well-known comic books. And again, that was something that I only did. I said to my agent a long time ago, don't send me other people's stuff anymore. I just want to do my own stuff for a while. But they knew I love Mouse Guard, and they said, okay, I'll make an exception. I keep making exceptions for the things that I love. Like I made an exception for Star Wars, made an exception for Mouse Guard. I'm actually doing a video game adaptation and a TV pilot right now. So again, if it's something that I really want to, I think the exception to the kind of that weird adopted child analogy I made is if it's every now and again I see something you go like, oh, why didn't I think of that? I wish I'd have thought that. But again, it's coming from a creative place. It's like, oh my God, that's so cool. I wish I could have thought of that. Getting to adapt it or working it in another medium is like the next best thing to that. You get to play in that sandbox. It was so cool. But again, it's coming from, I never have that reaction because the thing sold 1 million units. It always comes from like just that voice entirely that just says, that's cool. And you just have to listen to that voice more than anything a spreadsheet will ever tell you, I think.
Sounds like good advice. Gary, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.